Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this UK Research and Innovation Future Leader Fellowships webinar. Today, we will be giving an overview and introduction to the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme, aimed at applicants from business. So myself and my colleagues Steve and Abby will be giving you that introduction to the scheme and talking about the scheme's key aims and objectives. Then we will have a live interview with Ayantika Mitra, who is one of our successful individuals funded through the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme, and she'll be telling you about her experience and some top tips for applicants. Then my colleague Abby will take you through the application and assessment process for the scheme and how you can get started on an application if you decide that this scheme is right for you. And then we will end with a question and answer session, and this will be in two parts. We will look at the questions submitted when you registered for the webinar, and in any time we have left, we will also do a live Q&A. So the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme exists because we want the UK to continue to be a vibrant environment for innovation and research, and a global leader of business, science and society. And to do that, we need to identify the future leaders that will get us there. And so the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme exists to support the leaders of tomorrow to flourish and excel in their careers, to benefit not only themselves, but the team that they work with, the company they work for, and ultimately the UK as a whole. And the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme is the very first scheme to span the entire remit of UK research and innovation. So it offers unprecedented levels of funding to support early career individuals from both business and academia across all sectors and disciplines, and those that are working on the interface of business and academia or interdisciplinary areas. So the objectives of the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme are to develop, retain, attract and sustain research and innovation talent within the UK, to foster new research and innovation career pathways. Like I said, this includes those at the academic and business interface and its interdisciplinary boundaries, and facilitate the movement of people between sectors. To provide sustained funding and resources for the best early career researchers and innovators, and to provide long-term and flexible funding to tackle difficult and novel challenges and support adventurous and ambitious programs. And I should say that we're not looking for all of these things in each and every application. These are the objectives of the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme as a whole. So what does the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme offer? Well, you can apply for up to £1.5 million over 4 years, and that can be used to fund this ambitious innovation and research from top talent in the organisation. So you can claim salary costs, not only for the individual, the Future Leader Fellow, but also for the team that's working with them, and anything you might expect from a project grant. So materials and equipment that you need to carry out the project, you could apply for those as well. You could also request funds to expand innovation knowledge, develop and inspire others, network with experts, and increase the profile of both yourselves as the applicant and the business. And we want to see really creative ways of you bringing those things to fruition in your application, and any funds that supports those things will be considered. And the scheme also supports flexible and part-time working options. So what will the future leader, this individual that the application is centred around, how will they benefit from the scheme? Well, unprecedented levels of government budget to turn ideas into reality. And this really is a high level of government budget for a scheme that centres around an individual. It offers them a chance to demonstrate and have a real step change in their career trajectory. It offers networking across the cohort, putting them at the forefront of modern interdisciplinary innovation. And like I said before, there are flexible and part-time options. So you can manage this around other businesses like usual activities or any kind of part-time caring responsibilities. You don't have to work on this fellowship 100% of the time. And what will a business benefit from? Well, a business will benefit from funding of up to 1.5 million over the 4 years, with considerable flexibility in how this is spent. The ability to attract or retain the most talented early career innovators. So this scheme can be used to recruit individuals into the organisation It can be centred around an individual that doesn't work for the organisation yet, or it can be centred around an existing employee to retain them in the organisation. This is public money, so it reduces the risk to the organisation of investing and developing a new innovative idea. And it can be used to develop collaborations and partnerships. So looking at business success in the scheme to date, we funded a small cohort of 5 businesses in round 3 of the scheme, and we'll be making a public announcement of who we're funding in round 4 next week. So keep an eye out on the Future Leader Fellowships webpage and also our social medias so that you see that when it's announced. The success rate for this scheme overall is 20%, and you can find a breakdown of who's been funded in rounds 1, 2, 3, and soon to be round 4 on our Future Leader Fellowships website. And the support we offer for businesses, so in the next webinar, which is on the 26th of October, and we'll be telling you more about that at the end, but in that next webinar, we'll share ways that you can improve your application and avoid common pitfalls that we see, particularly from business applicants. So there's lots of help and support available to make sure that you can put in the best application you possibly can. And something I really want to reiterate here is that this is not just another project grant. The Future Leader Fellowship Scheme exists to support really exciting and impactful innovation and research that's led by an individual applicant. They can develop a team around them, but it should be centered around that one person. And it also needs to have really strong support from the host organization. So this is the business or company where the applicant works. That organization needs to demonstrate their support to the individual and also demonstrate that they're the best organization for this work to take place in. So that could be demonstrated by their kind of collaborations and their networks, whatever's the right mechanism to demonstrate that for the sector. So before we carry on, I just want to unpick what we mean by research and innovation. And there's a huge number of different definitions for this, but one we like to come back to is asking the difficult questions and exploring new ways to answer them. So an innovator could be a person who introduces new methods and ideas and products. And this can be an individual from any sector. So the innovation and research that we're looking to fund through these fellowships should be challenging and ambitious. We want the work to be really bold. The project or the portfolio of work over the 4 years should demonstrate a higher than normal level of risk and be outside of business as usual activities. If it's more of the same for the business, it's unlikely to be competitive. And we want it to be impactful. It must demonstrate how the work will impact not only the business, but beyond the business. And this could be societal, economic, and/or environmental impact. And for this scheme, it needs to be really clear that the individual is the driving force and the voice of the application. We're looking for future leaders as people who can demonstrate exceptional leadership potential. And by early career, we mean someone with experience in research and innovation. So we need to see that these individuals can take on a project of this scale and magnitude over the 4 years. But these individuals need to have untapped potential. They need to be able to make a real step change in their career by undertaking this fellowship. And I just want to pause here for a moment and say that as UK Research and Innovation, we realise that leadership looks different on everyone. And we'd really encourage you to look at how you match the 4 assessment criteria for this scheme, which my colleague Abby will take you through later on in the presentation, and not how you fit into any preconceived ideas of a leader and what that person looks like in your sector or area. And so to consider whether this might be an appropriate scheme for you to apply to or someone at your organisation to apply to, we've put together a few questions that we think it would be helpful for you to ask yourself. So do you have evidence of success in your career? You need to prove that you're exceptional, that you can take on an award of this scale and size, but also that you have the potential to grow into a future leader during the fellowship. How you prove this is up to you. There's lots of different metrics and ways that you can show this in your application. And I'd also like to highlight here a common misconception that you do not have to have a PhD to apply to this scheme. Are you already creating and innovating? This scheme is not for quick fix, off-the-shelf solutions. It's a long-term scheme, so we want to see someone really creative and ambitious doing something different. Is your idea big enough? Like I've just said, this scheme exists to facilitate long-term research and innovation. It's a 4-year scheme, and so we want to see ideas that, that really take that duration to come to fruition. We want to see that the project of work is ambitious enough to take 4 years. Are you creating new approaches that will change a whole industry? Keep coming back to impact. Yes, there needs to be direct impact to the individual and their team and the business, but it needs to go further than that as well. And will you take your team with you on the journey to success? We've said this scheme is built around an individual applicant and their voice and their drive must come through. But that individual can also build a team around them, and they should consider that team's leadership skills and development as well as their own. And then finally, a little bit more on the host organisation. So this is the business that the individual is employed by. And this must be a UK-based business, but it can be a business of any size in any sector. There are no restrictions. The organisation must provide an environment where the applicant and the project, the body of work, will flourish. And this might include mentorship, facilities, training, support from senior leadership, but it could include so much more than that. Anything that you think is relevant to the individual and the business and the sector, we'd encourage you to include. And then the last thing I want to say is that a financial contribution is required by the host organisation, as this funding is subject to state aid. And we will circulate more information when we follow up from the webinar, but please be aware that a financial contribution is normally expected from the host organisation. So I hope that was a useful overview to the scheme. We've got lots more still to tell you, but we just wanted to highlight the key aims and objectives and get you thinking about whether you're a really good fit for this scheme and what it exists to do. And now we will move to a conversation with a successful applicant. Ayantika Mitra from TISEX, and the conversation will be led by Stephen McComb from the KTN.
I represent the KTN, and I've been involved with trying to encourage businesses to apply for this, and also working with the FLF team to understand how to share this with businesses. So one of the key questions that keeps coming back, and you'll see it even in the chat box, is around, is this only for academia? Are you sure this is not only for academia? Are you sure there's any businesses? And just keep sort of repeating the question of, are we sure this is for business? So we felt it was important to address this point head on. We have invited Ayantika to demonstrate that businesses can be successful at it, and also to just give it a small sort of demonstration around what a business might look like. And we're not saying you copy Ayantika's application, but just to give a flavour of the type of person it is, and also sort of some of their experience. So that's the point of the conversation. So the first question over to Ayantika is just to introduce yourself. Where are you from? What's your company, etc.?
Hi, Stephen. Thank you for having me here. So I'm Ayantika. I work at a company called TISEX. So we are an SME, just under 20 people, so quite definitely on the small side. And we're really, at our heart, we are a materials technology company. So we're pioneering ultra lightweight components for aircraft and spacecraft. And my fellowship is looking at how do you use digital technologies to accelerate the adoption of new materials into what are safety critical components. So how do you use Industry 4.0, a host of digital technologies to really accelerate, using virtual certification to try and, instead of it taking 20 years for new materials to enter the market, it's taking 5 or 8 years.
Okay, just go back a little bit on you as a person. You know, have you a degree? Where did you study? Have you a master's, PhD? What's sort of some of your background on it?
just to reassure anyone on the call who's worried that you have to have a PhD to apply to this, you absolutely don't. Yes, it's beneficial, and that's one stream of it. But myself, I have a bachelor's degree in maths, and that's as far as I got in terms of higher education. And for me, I applied to the fellowship program because I'd had sort of worked in industry for 9 years previously and worked in manufacturing. So whilst at university, I'd co-founded a manufacturing startup. So manufacturing has very much been my passion and obsession. And you know, so you don't have to have necessarily taken an academic route. You can come into the program through multiple routes.
And how did you provide that evidence to say this is, I have equivalent to PhD? What was sort of the lines or things you sort of argued through that case?
That bit is tricky, especially if you're a business applicant, because, and especially with businesses, you know, typically we don't tend to advertise all of the crown jewels in terms of the technology and all of the R&D that goes on particularly. So I did have a patent, so I've sort of stuck that in, made that quite prominent on the application, but it's just trying to break down your experience in sort of discrete chunks of especially, you know, you achieved X technical aims, and breaking that down into how can you demonstrate that what you've done is focused, independent work? And I think that really helps, but absolutely. And I was quite surprised. I was quite afraid of that, how the experience would come across. But yeah, it's obviously the assessors and the program take that into consideration if it's not purely academic.
Okay. And do you have any publications or similar, or did you focus very heavily on just the business side of it?
Absolutely, just on the business side, because I haven't published anything.
Okay.
I'm completely unfamiliar even with that sort of world almost. So it's looking at so for the past experience in terms of building a manufacturing platform, what needed to be achieved and why was it different to what you know, an off-the-shelf solution. Okay, and it's really showing, you know, what approach did you take to build something.
Okay, and the actual project that you're putting in, so you started to explain some of that, but could you share a little bit more about what's the project that you put forward for the 4 years of the FLF?
Okay, so it's using digital technologies. Now, what we do is we are vertically integrated materials manufacturer. So I'm quite fortunate that I get to see all of the steps that are involved in manufacturing a metal composite. But that does mean that you've got to be able to integrate those steps. And one of the key issues with something like manufacturing composite is that it's really easy to introduce defects. And the last thing that an aircraft manufacturer will want is embedded defects in a component. So you've got to be able to show that the processing of across the stages has been consistent. And actually, there's a lot that's happened in the last few years with sensor technology that you can now incorporate and actually do a considerable amount of data analytics to try and show that you know what's gone on within a process, and that you can almost build that into virtual certification. So that's where we want to head to.
Okay, so is it fair to say you're bringing together lots of different specialties to make some sort of bigger impact on the overall industry? Is that fair? Yeah. Okay, excellent. Within the application process, it is very heavily focused on developing you as a future leader, not today, but future and developing. So what can you explain some of the stuff you put into your application and to your plans around leadership development and what you see as your sort of career path stuff?
So I guess for me, one of the absolutely critical things was, yes, you sort of look at what leadership training you need, and that would be to some extent a personal thing, because it depends on which areas you feel that you need either formal leadership training on or informal training through mentorship, etc. But for me, it was really critical that you also develop the team, because, you know, ultimately it takes a team of people to deliver on, you know, you can have a vision, you still need people to believe in that vision to really deliver it. And so, and the absolutely fantastic thing about the fellowship program is you get to fund that development and training for your team as well. So that's an absolutely fantastic opportunity. And I would really, really recommend people, you know, take that up.
Okay, so you're thinking even beyond yourself as to the people around you and how you're going to, say, lead leaders. Is there specific things that you identified as gaps within yourself and your application?
Oh yes, yeah, so it's a very long list.
Okay.
but specifically, so there are short leadership courses at certain business schools which cover what I feel I could really you know, learn more on. And for me, again, within the business, so one of our senior leaders, exceptional at networking, so that there will be that sort of mentorship to try and again get exposed to some of our customer base and start interacting with them, building those networks. So you can have I guess internal mentorship as well and external mentorships. So for me, it's particularly on the networking side and building those relationships. I think that will also be a key focus.
Okay, that's very encouraging, because a lot of the questions that come through is, do you need to be a fully developed leader? And I think you're emphasizing that concept of we expect there to be development within the application. So thank you for that. Moving on slightly to the organization, I can see your company banner in the background. Could you just explain a little bit about who the company is, where they're based, what are they trying to achieve, and what do they get out of this FLF?
Yeah, so we are, again, a small business. Just to give a bit of background, I think we're 17 people, just about $1 million in turnover. So this is also quite a significant investment for the business as well, because it is 30% funded by the business over the full 4 years. So I guess a very quick background. So this tube weighs as much as a packet of crisps, but it will carry an African elephant. So we make ultra lightweight materials, and it's still very much in the R&D phase. But what we're doing is, how do you introduce that into, you know, safety critical components? So very much the vision for the business is, how do you, it's lightweighting, it is making far more efficient aircraft or spacecraft than we use at the moment. And this, in terms of how the fellowship fits in with the business objectives, then obviously it's not solving any of the short-term objectives, but it is absolutely aligned with the medium to long-term objectives.
Okay, so the key there is around alignment with the future business. Is that sort of okay? Excellent, thank you. And moving on to the last questions, really, just on your personal reflection. This is a reasonably complex application. It does take some time. It takes quite a bit of investment on your side. So, lessons learned. What would you do differently, and what would you share with your best friend who might be considering applying?
I would say one thing to absolutely do, which I made every use of, was, and this isn't a plug for the KTN, but I found the KTN webinars and guidance on how to fill out the application form really useful. So for my round in particular, there was how to write an excellent case for support, which I rewatched multiple times. So that was incredibly helpful. I think also go out there and speak to people, because whilst you have an idea of what you want to build, you know, it also helps to sort of bounce that across, you know, say, you know, within your organization, within senior management, and even externally. So it's bounce around the idea of your program if it's not fully formed. Definitely get as much help. I took every opportunity to get mock interviews, etc. done. And again, I was very fortunate, because we're working with University of Derby and University of Manchester on this, but for just time limited parts of the program. And so I took every opportunity to get mock interviews done by them as as well.
Okay. And did you write the application on your own, or were you sort of involved in a wider team, or how did that work?
I did write the application on my own, but it was interesting because it's very different. I'd never done anything like this. So it can seem like a very alien and intimidating process, but there's definitely a lot of guidance out there. And the great thing about this is that you will get feedback about your application by assessors, and you have, unlike any other grant program, you can actually respond to their sort of concerns or comments. So, and again, take every opportunity there to really address and, you know, say, what is your vision? What did it, how you want to develop as a leader? And you have that opportunity to really address things if the first time round it didn't quite meet the mark.
Okay, excellent. And my final question, this is a very prestigious award, a fantastic win for you and the company. How did you celebrate when you were told about it?
So we found out, so I found out, I think, in March, and told the team, and obviously really excited, and we thought, you know, we'll go out for drinks, and then COVID happened. So we haven't quite done the celebratory drink yet. Okay. So hopefully at some point we will get around to that.
Okay, well, this is documented that they will have to celebrate with you in the future. So fantastic, congratulations, and thank you for sharing your experience. I'm going to pass back to Abby, who's going to talk about the application process. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephen and Ayantika. That was really, really interesting. So now I just want to talk to you a bit more about the actual process of applying and assessment. So here we've got a diagram of an overview of the assessment and application process. So it's comprised of about 7 stages, and for 4 of these stages, you will be required to directly input. So stages 1 and 2 at the start, these are both the written proposals. So firstly, you submit an outline proposal that must be submitted via JES, which is our online system, before you submit your full application. This is a mandatory part of the process, which is used for internal resource planning. So please do be aware that you won't receive feedback on this, and don't be put off when you don't receive feedback. Once you've submitted the outline proposal, you should then go on to prepare and submit your full application via JES. And we understand that JES may be a new system, as it is typically used for academic funding opportunities. So we will be providing some extra guidance in the next webinar to really get you comfortable with the system before applying. So once you've submitted your application, the Future Leader Fellowships team will check all of the necessary information has been included. The application will then progress to the external and independent review process. And as Ayantika mentioned in the interview session, as the applicant, you will have the opportunity to submit a response to the reviewer comments, which will be passed on to the shortlisting panels along with the original reviews. So it's a great opportunity after you've submitted your full application to fill in any gaps or answer any questions that the reviewers might have. If your proposal is progressed by the shortlisting panel, you'll then be invited to interview, where a panel of independent experts will ask you about your proposal, again, ask you to fill in any gaps that haven't been addressed in the review process. But they also really want to gain an understanding and a really good sense of your potential as a future leader, because this is very much a person-focused and person-centric scheme. And throughout the application process, you will be assessed against 4 equally weighted criteria. And this is something we're going to discuss in more detail in the next webinar that's coming up at the end of October. But it is worth mentioning these now, because the equal weighting means that in the early stages of planning your application, you should really give due care and attention to each of these 4 assessment pillars. So, some key dates for your diaries for getting started on the application. So the JES system opens for outline proposals on the 10th of November and it closes on the 10th of December. So you've got a month to do your first outline proposal. You can then submit your full proposal from the 3rd of December and you've got until the 19th of January 2021. The timings after proposal submission are currently to be confirmed, but hopefully these dates will give you an idea of general timeframes so you know what you're working towards. So the opportunity for the candidate to respond will fall around the spring-summer 2021 period, and then interviews will follow in autumn 2021, with the latest start date for award, the 1st of February 2022. After the interviews, you'll normally hear within 4 to 6 weeks whether or not you've been successful, and then there is some flexibility in start date. But like I said, please do check back the website for more information about these dates, and you can see the confirmed deadlines for each different section. So some things to think about, bearing all of this in mind, and if the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme sounds like something you're really interested in, these are some starting points and things to consider to help you begin to develop and plan your application. So firstly, start to gather evidence that demonstrates your potential as a future leader, as you will need to include this in your application form. This could include examples of research and development projects you've successfully delivered, new ideas you've pushed forward, or networks you've established. Secondly, start to build any partnerships or collaborations you wish to foster with other businesses or academic institutions ahead of applying. We have had some feedback from businesses in previous rounds who have said that this is actually one of the most time-consuming parts of the process. So it's really good to lay those foundations and reach out to those contacts as early as possible in the process. Please also remember that assessors will be looking to understand how the candidate has personally shaped the proposed research or innovation in the application form, and how this work will really benefit the career of the individual. So I really encourage you to think about this early on and to use this as the basis to shape your application rather than leaving it as an afterthought. And then finally, if you do come across any unfamiliar language in the application form on the JES system, please don't be put off. The system, as I mentioned, is often used for academic grants and across lots of different funding opportunities. So if something sounds unfamiliar, don't get too hung up on it. As Stephen said, this scheme is absolutely for you, for businesses. And if you're really struggling, you can also contact the JES help desk for extra support. So there's a few next steps now that I'd really encourage you to take if you are interested and keen on applying for the Future Leader Fellowships Award. So as I mentioned, we've got another webinar coming up on Monday, the 26th of October. The purpose of this webinar is to really give you some extra support and guidance in actually preparing a really high quality application for the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme, with some more practical tips and advice based on our observations and learnings from previous rounds. I'd also suggest that you do set up a JES account sooner rather than later, just to make sure that you're really comfortable and familiar with the system before the outline proposal submission date opens. I'd also suggest that you start to read and unpack the information in the guidance documents, which can all be found on the Future Leader Fellowships website, and we can circulate a link for you. There's a lot of guidance on there, so it's worth giving yourself enough time to really work through and make sure you understand everything that you're reading. Also, follow the social media channels for Innovate UK and UK Research and Innovation. We'll be sharing some more stories and insights from our existing business fellows, so if you're interested in that, that's a great place to find out, as well as some blog posts and additional resources that you may want to use to help support your application. And finally, if you can't find the answer to your question in the guidance when you're looking through it, or the frequently asked questions document, then we have a dedicated fellows inbox, fellows@ukri.org, who can deal with questions relating to your application. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Gabrielle, who is going to be leading the question and answer session.
Thank you, Abby, and hello everyone. My name is Gabrielle Neeson. I'm a Senior Project Manager for the Future Leader Fellowships Scheme, and I'll be taking you through the Q&A session today. So we're going to do this session in 2 parts. First, we will go through some questions that you've submitted upon registration. Thank you to everyone who took the time to do that. It's really helpful for us to know which areas we need to give you more information on and to see the questions that come up again and again. We won't be able to go through all of the questions. We quite literally had hundreds. So what we've done is group the questions into categories, and we're going to answer the ones that will hopefully benefit the most number of people. And then we'll let you know how you can get a response to maybe more individual questions later on. And then in the second part, we will look at questions that you've been asking today. So while we've heard our other speakers, I've been busy in the background typing answers to some of the questions and also indicating some questions that we'll get to in this part of the Q&A. And if there's anything that we haven't covered, please keep it coming and I'll try to get to it. We have up until 11:15 for this session. We might not take all of that time, but we have half an hour if we need it. So I will try to get through as many questions as I can. And before we get stuck into the Q&A, one final thing I just wanted to reiterate is that yes, this whole session is being recorded. And as Stephen mentioned, we will check the quality of the recording, particularly the audio of that first section, before we send it out. So you'll get that early next week in an email, including the PDF of the slides and also links to any of the resources that we've mentioned today. So I just wanted to say that before we get stuck in, because that is one of the most common questions we get asked, whether the session is being recorded. But now we'll get into the questions about the scheme. So the first grouping of questions I wanted to look at was kind of all things business. And this whole webinar today has been focusing particularly on business applicants into this scheme. So these questions are obviously very relevant. And the first one, is this scheme open to SMEs, so small and medium enterprises, as well as large businesses? And the answer is yes, absolutely it is. Businesses of all sizes across all sectors are welcome to apply to this scheme. And if you look at the businesses that we funded in round 3, they are actually predominantly SMEs. There are some household names of large organisations in there as well, but they are majority SMEs. And Iantica from Tysix, who we heard from earlier, is a prime example of that, with 20 people, I think, in that company. Also, if we look at the businesses that we funded in round 4, like Stephen said, these aren't announced publicly yet. We will be able to share these businesses with you next week. But there are a lot of SMEs in there, so please do take the time to have a look at that and examples of some smaller and medium-sized companies that we funded. Our second question, what support can you offer to businesses to help them produce a competitive application? So we have a number of resources available. This introductory webinar, just to give you a flavour of the scheme and its overall aims and objectives, and to get you starting to think about how to approach an application if you think it's the right scheme for you. As has been mentioned throughout, we have a second webinar on Monday, the 26th of October. Again, when we follow up from this webinar, we'll make sure you have the details you need if you want to register at that second webinar. And that second webinar is all about writing a high quality application. And as what Iantica mentioned in her speech about that KTN webinar, where we offer help on all stages of the application, but also particularly that all-important case for support. We'll talk about that in that webinar on the 26th. We also have several blogs that we've put together as a team on the gov.uk website. These go over some common mistakes that are particularly relevant to business applicants and how you can make sure you avoid making the same mistakes. And we have a kind of myth-busting blog as well. And if you apply and you'll get to the interview stage, you're successful at getting to the interview stage, then we also offer support there to make sure that you're really well prepared for that interview. So there's lots that we're doing, and there's lots more that we're looking to do in the future. So again, please do keep an eye on our website and our Innovate UK and UKRI social medias, because that's how we'll let you know. And then the third question It says, given only 5 business applicants have been funded so far, do you have any insights you can share on what's prevented more business-based applicants applying or being successful in having applied? This is quite a big question, but I did really want to tackle it. So yes, the first thing I would say is that we do have more than 5 businesses. Like I've mentioned, we will be able to announce publicly the winners of the round 4 round of the scheme, and that includes higher than 5 number of businesses. And we are seeing a growth in business applicants and business success round on round, which we're really, really pleased about as a team. What's prevented more business-based applicants applying? Well, ever since the scheme was launched in 2018, it's always been open to applicants from both business and academia. But in hindsight, we appreciate that it wasn't really promoted through the right channels to reach innovative businesses. And we've now absolutely overhauled our comms approach, and the fact that there's a really high number of you here today hopefully reflects that we are now doing a much better job of getting the word out. And we've also made some key changes to the scheme because we did a lot of workshops from business, heard what you were saying, heard why perhaps the scheme in its initial format didn't really work as well as it should have. So we've made some changes. We've introduced the option to work on the scheme, to work on the package of work that you're applying for through the scheme between 60 and 100% of the time. So you don't have to spend all your working time on this fellowship. You can do some business as usual activities like Stephen mentioned, and you can do a kind of portfolio of work in an area, not just looking at one project over the 4 years. So those are some of the things that we've introduced over the last couple of rounds. And then the last point of this large question is about success. So what's prevented businesses being successful? And a lot of this is covered in our blog about common mistakes that some business applicants have been making. But I just want to reiterate here that this isn't a short, quick application with a fast turnaround that might be more suitable for a project grant or a feasibility study. This is long-term funding that really needs a well-considered, well-thought-out application. And that's one of the biggest mistakes, I guess you can say, that we see from business applicants, is that lack of detail in the application. And also, Ayantika mentioned that she wrote her application herself with support from the business, and that is really important. And I think that's why sometimes we don't see businesses being as successful as they could be, is that personal voice and narrative and ambition doesn't always come through the application. So on to the second set. The next set was all around applicant eligibility, and this is something that we get asked about all the time. So applicant eligibility is something that we can't confirm. So the questions in the chat, which I haven't acknowledged, which say, am I eligible? Or, can you let me know that I'm eligible? We can't say yes or no to that. It's not a tick box exercise. It's one of the 4 key assessment criteria of the scheme. So it's up to you to make a really strong case for the assessors and those shortlisting and interview panels that Abby mentioned. It's up to you to make the case as to why you are an appropriate candidate for the scheme. I just want to check, Abby, I don't think we're all looking at the second slide. So can we go to the applicant eligibility slide, please? Thank you. So the first question here on applicant eligibility, what would you class as equivalent research innovation experience and or training compared to a doctorate level of education? And this one has been asked a lot in the chat. So first I should say that you absolutely do not need a PhD to apply to this, but you do need to demonstrate some experience of research and innovation. This is, like we've said, long-term funding, and funding over 4 years of 1.5 million is probably not appropriate for someone's kind of first grant, first foray into research and innovation leadership. So it's about finding that sweet spot of showing that you are really capable of taking on funding of this magnitude and this ambition, and thriving, I should say, not just capable of taking it on, but that you can really thrive in the duration of the fellowship. But it still needs to be an exciting and ambitious challenge for you, and demonstrate that it will make a considerable change to your career and your career trajectory. Then the second question here, how do I provide evidence of a strong track record if my company actively avoids publications and patents? So there's a number of ways that you can demonstrate a strong track record impact, and it's going to look really different in the sector that you're in or the type of business that you're in. So I would say, think about what you would highlight on your CV, or what you would highlight, on your LinkedIn profile. What are your biggest achievements? And yeah, this is going to look very different. It might be, a product, or it might be less tangible than that. It might be, that you've worked on a process where actually, it's reached a huge number of people and they've adopted it. If it's more of kind of social science area, it could be really, really varied, and you will know best kind of metrics and things that really help demonstrate success in your area. So as I talk about the things that you want to, rather than trying to fit into a box of talking about publications or patents. You can absolutely be successful without having a track record of publications or even patents. Are there any age restrictions placed on the scheme? So there is one, you have to be over 18, but other than that, there are no age restrictions. So there's no upper limit, there's no age range. Again, it's all about demonstrating why you are a suitable applicant and finding that kind of sweet spot. And finally, on this slide, how can we find a candidate for our company? And this is one I wanted to talk about because it's a common misconception. So we don't offer support as UKRI or KTN to help you find a person to build this application around. This can be someone already in your business, or it can be someone that you want to bring in if you're successful at securing this fellowship. But we don't offer a kind of matching service. Other schemes do, so the KTP, the Knowledge Transfer Partnerships that some of you might be familiar with, there you can find a candidate for the programme of work you want to undertake, but this is a bit different. So for the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme, we don't offer that. You need to find the candidate either from within the company or outsource them and write the application kind of with them in mind, and make sure that they're writing portions of the application and that their voice is really coming through. So it must be written around an individual person. Then on to the next slide. So the next section, and there were a huge number of questions on this in the chat, around startups and spin-outs. So can startups and spin-outs apply? Yes, absolutely, they can apply. Like we've talked about, there's no upper or lower size limit to the size of the organisation. But I would ask you, if you are a startup or a spin-out and you're looking to apply, to consider the 4 assessment criteria that Abby shared earlier, and think how, in the position that you're in a startup and a spin-out, can I write a really strong case where I can show that my organisation as the host is the right place for me to be to do this innovation or research? Do I have the right kind of connections and mentorship and support? And that doesn't all have to come from within the company, but it needs to be a really clear case that the support you can get from within the company and the support the company can help you reach is sufficient to really score highly against that assessment criteria. And on a similar vein for the second question, can company owners apply as innovators for the fellowship? So yes, again, absolutely, company owners can apply. There's no title or position in the company that would make you ineligible. You can apply, but again, I would ask you to consider the same thing. If you're a company owner and you're looking at that applicant and their development assessment criteria, and you're the applicant, how can you put forward a really strong case that this is going to be a step change in your career when you're already the owner of a company? And how will you backfill your role? How will you make sure that the company can keep functioning as well as you taking on this really exciting body of work in the fellowship? So the answers to both those are yes, absolutely, but just make sure that you can make a case against all 4 of those assessment criteria. And then the final question on startups and spin-outs, something again we get asked a lot: is there a minimum turnover a company must be making? Or will the company need to have been active for a long time or a certain period of time before applying? And the answer is no, and again, no. So there's no tick box exercise here. There's no kind of set financial limit or set time that the company needs to have been active for. But we would ask you to consider how viable the company is and whether the company is in a position to financially support this application. So Stephen earlier touched on state aid, which all applications from business into the scheme are subject to state aid. And that means that you could get 100% funding if you're doing very early stage fundamental research, but that you could have to contribute potentially up to 75% if you're a large organisation and you're right on the cusp of commercialisation. And that's a sliding scale. And again, we can send some documentation around with that when we follow up from this webinar. But just make sure that you're in a position as a company that you can match fund your proportion of this fellowship. And all successful businesses will go through some financial checks at the very end of the process if we are able to offer you an award, just to make sure that that is all above board. So please make sure that you're happy and confident with that before applying. And in terms of how long you need to have been registered for before applying, all we ask is that you're registered as a UK-based business on Companies House at the time of applying. That's the only prerequisite there. So on to our fourth category, because I want to leave a bit of time for some questions coming in on the Q&A. The interface between business and academia. Are candidates that work in both industry, 0.8 FTE, and academia, 0.2 FTE, encouraged to apply? And again, the answer is absolutely yes. You heard Stephen talk right at the beginning that one of the overarching aims of the scheme is to increase mobility between business and academia. And so we would absolutely welcome an application from an applicant looking to work part-time in industry, part-time in academia. In this scenario, there's two options, I suppose. The applicant could spend 100% of their time on the fellowship, be based in industry, but spend some time working in academia, or the applicant could do a reduced hours fellowship, so they could work on the fellowship for 80% of their time. All of that time could be spent in in industry, and that other 20% of time could be spent in academia outside of the fellowship. Again, there are no preferences from our point of view. It's whatever works best for you as an applicant and business, and it's up to you to make a really strong case for that. And then the next question, as a lead applicant, I am a researcher at a UK university and also run a business. Is it possible to apply for the funding wearing both hats? Firstly, thank you for joining us, because you're a very, very busy person to do both of those things. But you will need to identify one organisation that can host you for the fellowship. So either the university or the business must be your primary host, but that doesn't prevent you working at both the university and the business. You will just need to identify one host, and they will really need to back your application. So it's possible, absolutely, but you will need that primary host. Then on to the fifth and final section from the questions that we had in upon registration. So international scope. Is this scheme only open to UK citizens? Absolutely not. No, this scheme is open to anyone in the world, but what we ask is that they, in a business context, are working at a UK-based business. Not all of the work has to be carried out in the UK. The majority does, but there's possibility for work to happen outside of the UK. But no, it's open to a wider pool of people than just UK citizens. And then our final question that we had in upon registration, are applicants that have a registered business in the UK to address issues in developing countries considered? So again, you do need to have a registered business in the UK, so that's good. And then, yes, you can address issues in developing countries. You just need to make sure that in the application, there's a really detailed case for the impact to the UK and the impact to the other countries that you're working in. So now we'll go to the live Q&A. I will start with some of the questions that came in on the chat when our previous speakers were talking, and then I'll look if there's any new ones that have come in whilst I've been talking. So the first one I've got here, is this round mainly for companies or are all welcome? No, this round is not specifically for companies or business. Both applicants from business and applicants from academia are welcome into this round of the scheme, and that's true for every round of the Future Leader Fellowship scheme. And there's also no ring-fenced budget, so it's open to both applicants from business and academia. I've got one here, reapplying. Reapplying, is this possible? Yes, absolutely. So if there's somebody on the line that has previously submitted an application to the scheme and hasn't been successful, then yes, you can reapply, but you can't reapply with exactly the same application. In order to reapply, we need you to look at the comments that you've received from assessment and really demonstrate that you've taken them on board and you've made steps to address the reasons that you weren't successful in your previous application. Do I have to have collaborators in academia? No, you don't. You can apply into the scheme as an applicant from one host organisation without any collaborators. Equally, you can have multiple collaborators from businesses, others in your supply chain, academia, public sector, whatever is most suitable for your project and programme of work and your development as an applicant. So we don't mandate that collaborators there, but they can be a really nice way to kind of strengthen an application and really show the kind of wider impact and value of what you're doing. Can this funding apply to 2 or more innovators who work on the same project? I'll answer this in 2 ways because I'm not exactly sure what the question was trying to get at. So yes, you can absolutely build a team around the individual. So you can have one person as the primary applicant, and then they can build a team around themselves and look at how they're developing that team, and that team can be involved and working full-time on the research and innovation. So in that sense, yes, you can have 2 people. If you're talking about 2 people equally leading the project, then you could apply as a job share. We do have that option available. It works very well for a small number of applicants, but probably not. I'd suggest that there was a kind of lead applicant there, and then you could have others in your team working with you, supporting you. Can you apply if your company has already had funding from Innovate UK? Yes, you can apply. The only thing we ask is that they're not for the same project of work. So if you've applied for a project of work, Innovate, and it's been successful and you've already got government funding for that, then you absolutely can't get more for exactly the same thing. So they do need to be different applications for different projects, but yes, you can have a project, an application into the Innovate UK, one of the Innovate UK grants, and a Future Leader Fellowships grant at the same time. So like we mentioned, they are very different applications. What company approval is required? Is a letter of support enough? So the host organisation, the company, yes, you will need to submit a letter of support, but I would say that's probably not enough. You need to have a really active and engaged host that's working with you as an applicant to develop this, because it needs to benefit, like we've heard from our previous speakers, it needs to benefit both the individual, but also have some really clear advantages for the business as well. So a letter of support is needed, but more than that is needed. Does the fellowship, I've got a few here on qualifications. So does the fellowship fund tuition fees towards a PhD? No, it does not. We can't fund PhDs through this scheme because we already have a lot of mechanisms as UK research and innovation to fund PhDs. We don't want to duplicate that with this scheme. We need individuals into this scheme to not necessarily have the PhD, but have that level of experience already. So it doesn't fund PhDs, but I have another one here that says, can it fund an MBA? And yes, it can fund an MBA if that's embedded well in your kind of development plans and it fits really nicely alongside the package of innovation and research that you're doing, then yes, you can request monies to do an MBA. The next one I have here is, how does the scheme help in learning from fellow leaders? Is there structured engagement? So yes, there is. If you are successful in securing a Future Leader Fellowships, then you will become part of an ever-growing cohort of future leaders. And as Stephen mentioned, we do a lot to make sure that you can network with these other individuals, share opportunities, and that is structured with events and sessions throughout the year. At the moment, obviously, those are all virtual, but we hope that when it's safe to do so, we can go back to having some physical events. But yes, there's a lot of structured support there if you're successful in securing a fellowship. So we have about 5 minutes left. This was scheduled from 10 till 11:15. So I'll just do a few more questions and then share and remind you of some key information before we close. So the next one here, can I cost to backfill a role? So no, you can't. All the staff costs that you put in your application need to be directly working on the fellowship. So if you're moving someone to work on the fellowship, you can't cost to backfill that role. Are there any sectors you don't support? No. So again, I haven't acknowledged all of these in the Q&A because there's an awful lot of them, but there's a lot of questions that say, if I work in this sector, am I eligible? If I work in this sector, am I eligible? And the answer to all of them is yes. Like we mentioned right at the beginning, this is for businesses of all sizes and all sectors. So whatever sector you work in, you are welcome to apply. Can a business be 100% funded? Again, we've touched on this. All business applications are subject to state aid. So if you're doing fundamental research, there's a possibility that yes, you can be 100% grant funded by UKRI, but the larger the company and the closer you are to commercialization, that number decreases and you'll be required to put in a higher contribution as a business. What is the IP situation between an applicant, the host, and the team? So the first thing I should say is that UKRI will not take any IP. The IP will be as per your agreement as a company with your staff. So typically we expect that to be that the company retains is the owner and retains all the IP. So as long as the applicant, your employee or the employee of the company is signed up to those terms and conditions as part of their employment, then that would remain the same. We wouldn't mandate that you do anything different on receipt of this grant. If you want to share IP with a collaborator, again, that's at your discretion, and you need to make sure that you have that agreement in place prior to starting the fellowship. You don't need to have it prior to applying, just if you're successful, you need that in place prior to starting the fellowship. We'd encourage you to think about it earlier, but you don't need kind of formal paperwork at the point of application. Okay, I'll just round up by addressing these few. So there's a couple here that talk about clarification around collaborators, clarification that full overheads can be claimed. Are they tapered? There's a lot of questions, I guess, getting into more the practicalities of how to submit an application in that fine detail. So our next webinar on the 26th of October, so Monday in a few weeks' time, will cover this. So we will take you through the application process, all of the documentation that you need to submit and questions that you need to answer. And we will take you through, as Abby mentioned earlier, the GES system. So if you've never seen that system before, no need to worry. We'll take you through everything from landing on the homepage through to setting up an account. So those are the types of questions that we will address in detail at the next webinar. So I won't go into them now. But again, when we circulate the recording to this webinar, we'll put in the links to the guidance and you can start to have a read of some of that information. So I will end there. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. Hopefully you found a really valuable session. You now understand more about the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme and its aims, and you're starting to think about whether it might be the right thing for you to apply for. So like I keep referring back to, we will send a recording, a PDF of the slides and all the resources we've talked about today, plus a link so that you can sign up to that next webinar on the 26th of October, so that you have everything you need to explore this scheme in a bit more detail. Keep your eyes out on social media. We'll be circulating our blog posts and kind of snippets of other nuggets and gems of information that past applicants wish to share with future applicants. So there'll be a lot of activity on there. And all that's left for me to say is thank you very much for joining us. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend, and I will end the webinar there.